I knew the execution was scheduled before I even set my briefcase down. The air in the corporate suite of Vanguard Financial felt distinctly thinner this morning, stripped of its usual frantic energy. The junior analysts who usually clamored for my attention, desperate for a moment of mentorship or a scrap of praise, were suddenly very interested in the microscopic cells of their Excel spreadsheets. As a 35-year-old black woman who had fought tooth and nail through a landscape of generational wealth and entrenched nepotism to secure the position of VP of Acquisitions that possessed a finely tuned, survival-based radar for corporate sabotage. My phone buzzed with a sterile, ominous calendar invite. Alignment sync, 9:15 a.m. And there was no agenda attached, no preliminary brief, no friendly introductory note, just a mandatory summons from Marcus, the CEO who had inherited his empire from his father, directing me to conference room 4C. I arrived precisely at 9:14 a.m., only to find the heavy oak door firmly shut and the interior blinds completely drawn. The executive assistant, a nervous, perpetually sweating young man named Peter, refused to meet my gaze. "Marcus asked you to wait out here for a few minutes, Naomi," he mumbled, staring intently at the glowing keys of his mechanical keyboard, as if they held the secrets of the universe. "They are, finishing up a prior discussion." That was the first calculated microaggression of the morning, the deliberate theatrical power play of making a top-tier executive wait in the hallway like a reprimanded intern outside the principal's office. Through the frosted glass panel of the door, I could make out the blurry, motionless silhouettes of Marcus and Chloe, our notoriously ruthless director of human resources. They weren't wrapping up another meeting. They were letting me stew. They wanted to strip away my dignity before stripping away my title. For exactly 12 grueling minutes, I stood there, in my tailored obsidian blazer, absorbing the curious, pitying, and sometimes terrified glances of passing staff. A lesser professional might have paced the carpet, checked their phone obsessively, or demanded entry. I simply stood perfectly still, breathing evenly, mentally, reviewing the labyrinth of corporate architecture I had painstakingly built over the last 4 years. I had generated $40 million in undeniable, audited revenue this quarter alone. Tomorrow, my $4 million performance equity was scheduled to vest, locking in my financial independence. They thought keeping me waiting would break my composure and force me into a defensive posture. They had absolutely no idea I was just waiting for the clock to strike. When the heavy door finally clicked open, Chloe gestured me inside with a practiced, hollow smile that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. The room was aggressively sterile, stripped of any welcoming elements. There were no water glasses, no open laptops, no printed performance reports, and no friendly banter, just a single thick manila folder resting ominously on the center of the polished mahogany table. Marcus sat at the head of the room, leaning back in his ergonomic chair with a posture of manufactured nonchalance. He wouldn't even look me in the eye, preferring instead to meticulously inspect the silver cufflinks of his bespoke imported shirt. "Naomi, have a seat." Chloe said, her voice dropping an entire octave into what HR professionals internally refer to as the termination register, a tone completely devoid of empathy, designed to minimize legal liability. I remained standing, my hands lightly gripping the back of the plush leather chair. "I'll stand, Chloe. My schedule is tight this morning. What is this about?" Marcus finally looked up, his expression, a carefully rehearsed mask of feigned regret that completely failed to hide his obvious underlying greed. "We're pivoting the firm's strategic direction, Naomi. The market is shifting and we need to be agile. Unfortunately, as we streamline our leadership matrix to better align with these new fiscal realities, your role as VP of Acquisitions is being eliminated, effective immediately." He delivered the devastating lines smoothly, mechanically, as if firing the exact woman who had single-handedly built his most lucrative pipeline was as trivial as canceling a magazine subscription. Chloe, acting on cue, slid the manila folder across the table toward me. "This is your official separation agreement. As this is a role elimination entirely without cause, we are generously offering our standard 2-month severance package. This will include continuation of your basic health benefits, provided you sign the enclosed non-disparagement and non-compete clauses by 5:00 p.m. this Friday. Standard severance, 2 months of base pay in exchange for quietly walking away exactly 24 hours before a $4 million bonus hit my account. It was a calculated, bloodless assassination of my career and my compensation. They assumed that because I was a minority woman who had climbed the ranks from the bottom, someone who theoretically couldn't afford a protracted legal battle, I would be too shocked, too intimidated, or too desperate to fight back against the firm's billionaire backing. "I need your security badge and company phone," Chloe added, holding out her manicured palm expecting tears or rage. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't beg for my job or demand an explanation. I calmly reached into my designer tote bag, extracted the plastic badge and the encrypted corporate phone, placed them directly on top of their insulting severance offer, and looked Marcus dead in his cowardly eyes. "Understood," I whispered smoothly, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. To truly understand why I didn't lose my mind in that suffocating conference room, you have to understand the brutal reality of navigating corporate America as a Black woman in the upper echelons of high finance. You learn very early on that corporate meritocracy is a convenient myth sold to the working class, and loyalty to a corporation is nothing but a massive liability. You do not get protected by the system simply by working hard. You have to surgically weaponize the system to protect yourself. 3 years ago, during Vanguard's incredibly aggressive offshore restructuring phase, I was the only executive in the building who held the key intimate relationships with our notoriously difficult international investors. Marcus needed me desperately to keep the capital flowing and to appease the board. When it came time to renegotiate my employment contract, he was so eager to lock me in and prevent me from jumping ship to a competitor that he ordered the legal department to give me whatever boilerplate assurances she wants to sign the damn paper. He assumed in his narrow worldview that I would ask for something superficial, perhaps a larger corner office, a more prestigious title, or an exorbitant car allowance. Instead, I spent $7,000 of my own hard-earned money hiring a shark of an independent employment attorney. Together we drafted a highly specific, deceptively boring paragraph and buried it deep within the dense, unreadable equity addendum. It was designated Clause 11C subsection B. It was camouflaged on page 14, surrounded by tedious, mind-numbing compliance jargon about vesting schedules and blackout periods. But its language was absolute and lethal in the event of involuntary termination without documented progressive disciplinary cause within 48 hours preceding any major scheduled equity vesting event. The executive shall be entitled to an accelerated payout at a 2.5x punitive multiplier of the total unvested equity, plus immediate non-negotiable indemnification of base salary for 3 subsequent years. It was a contractual kill switch, a financial poison pill designed specifically and exclusively for the kind of amateur-hour short-sighted greed Marcus was executing today. When the revised contract circulated through the departments, Marcus hadn't read it. Chloe hadn't read it. The board's highly paid external counsel had merely skimmed it, assuming it was standard transitional protection for a key executive. They had all initialed the margins with their expensive pens, effectively signing a blank check disguised as a mundane PDF file. I knew they would eventually try to cut me out before my biggest payday. I had bet my entire career on their predictable arrogance. "Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings," Chloe announced, her sharp voice shattering my internal reminiscence. Right on cue, 2 burly men in cheap, ill-fitting suits stepped into the conference room, hovering like bouncers. It was the ultimate corporate humiliation, being marched through the open-plan bullpen you used to command, treated like a common criminal who might try to steal a stapler or sabotage the servers on the way out. I nodded gracefully, offering a serene, almost pitying smile. "Lead the way, gentlemen." I walked with my spine perfectly straight, my shoulders back, my heels clicking a steady, unbothered rhythm against the imported hardwood floors. I didn't rush, and I certainly didn't look down. Let them look at me. Let the junior associates, the whispering managers, and the shocked interns see exactly how Vanguard treats its top performers when it thinks it can save a dime. Inside my corner office, I packed precisely 3 things: a small silver-framed photo of my late grandmother, who had taught me the value of leverage, my customized Mont Blanc fountain pen, and a physical, leather-bound notebook containing absolutely 0 proprietary information, just my own personal musings and grocery lists. I deliberately left behind the framed awards, the brass plaques, and the heavy crystal trophies they had given me at last year's gala. They were worthless trinkets anyway, designed to buy loyalty without spending cash. Chloe hovered nervously in the doorway, clearly unnerved by my absolute silence and fluid movements. Usually terminated executives threw wild tantrums, threatened imaginary lawsuits, demanded to speak to the board, or broke down into hyperventilating tears. My absolute terrifying serenity was making her sweat through her silk blouse. "Your access to the cloud network has already been revoked, Naomi," she reminded me nervously, as if trying to provoke a reaction. "I'm intimately aware of how IT protocols work, Chloe," I replied, snapping the golden clasp of my designer tote bag shut. I walked right past her, breathing in the distinct scent of her expensive perfume, mixed with raw anxiety. I didn't take a dramatic detour to the legal department to plead my case. I didn't gloat or whisper to any sympathetic colleagues. I didn't need to say a single word to anyone in that cursed building. I simply pressed the elevator button, stepped inside the wood-paneled cab, and watched the polished steel doors close on my former life. As the elevator rapidly descended to the grand lobby, I glanced at my smartwatch. It was exactly 9:45 a.m. The trap was already set, the bait had been taken, and the digital timer was ticking down. I walked exactly 3 blocks away from the Vanguard corporate campus to a high-end minimalist espresso bar. I ordered a meticulously crafted flat white, tipped the barista $20, and sat at a quiet corner table with a direct, unobstructed view of the Vanguard skyscraper towering over the city skyline. I didn't open a laptop. I didn't furiously dial a lawyer. I just checked the glowing face of my personal smartwatch. Over the past year, knowing deep in my bones that this day was a statistical inevitability in the cutthroat world of finance, I had set up an automated dead man switch on my personal, highly encrypted offshore server. The logic was beautifully simple. If my Vanguard corporate email account failed to ping a response to a hidden server query within 30 minutes during standard business hours, indicating my network access had been abruptly and involuntarily severed by IT, a pre-scheduled encrypted email packet would automatically deploy to a very specific mailing list. At exactly 10:00 a.m., my wrist vibrated with a single silent push notification from my private server packet delivered. The recipients of this automated email were highly selective and wildly powerful. Richard Hughes, the notoriously unforgiving chairman of the board; David Chen, the lead corporate counsel; and a blind copied forwarding address directly to my own external litigation attorney's urgent inbox. The subject line was terrifyingly bland, entirely devoid of emotion: execution of Clause 11C regarding Naomi Washington, notice of contractual trigger. Attached to the email were high-resolution scans of the original contract, the updated addendums, the undeniable time-stamped metadata, of Marcus and Chloe's digital signatures on every single page, and a phenomenally concise legal brief outlining the exact mathematically undeniable financial liability they had just triggered by terminating me today. There was no emotional language complaining about fairness. There were no hollow threats of going to the press. Just raw, devastating mathematics and ironclad legal precedent. Sitting in the cafe, looking up at that glass tower, I knew exactly the kind of chaos that was about to erupt on the 42nd floor. The email would easily bypass the usual HR firewalls and spam filters because it was addressed directly to the board's private whitelisted server. It would land quietly in their inboxes like a digital grenade with the pin already pulled. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, bitter roast. For the first time in 4 agonizing years of corporate politicking, my blood pressure was perfectly normal. The hardest part of corporate warfare isn't setting the trap. It's having the absolute discipline to walk away and let the trap do the work. High above the city, on the restricted 42nd floor, David Chen Vanguard's lead counsel was in the middle of a stunningly mundane compliance review regarding offshore tax brackets when the priority email hit his inbox. As a battle-hardened veteran of high-stakes corporate litigation, David rarely flinched at anything. But as he read the first paragraph of my brief and hastily cross-referenced the attached PDF with the firm's own secure digital archives to verify its authenticity, the blood drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a Brioni suit. I didn't call HR to verify. He didn't send a discreet instant message. David physically jumped from his desk and ran down the carpeted hallway to the executive suite, bursting into Marcus's sprawling corner office without bothering to knock. Marcus was leaning back in his chair, laughing loudly, on speakerphone with a vendor about a weekend golf trip. David reached right over the desk and abruptly slammed his finger down on the disconnect button. "What the hell is your problem, David?" Marcus snapped, his arrogance flaring instantly at the perceived disrespect. "Did you fire Naomi Washington this morning?" David demanded, his voice dangerously low, entirely ignoring the CEO's outrage. "Yes, obviously, we're restructuring the division. It was handled completely by the book." Chloe gave her the standard exit paperwork and walked her out. Marcus scoffed, leaning back and crossing his arms. "She took it like a champ, actually. Didn't even make a peep. She knows how the game is played." "She didn't make a peep because she just successfully slit your throat, Marcus," David hissed, throwing the freshly printed email packet onto the center of the mahogany desk. "Look at page 14 of her retention contract, the exact one you and Chloe signed off on 3 years ago. You terminated her 24 hours before a massive vesting cycle without a shred of documented cause." Marcus frowned, picking up the paper with feigned indifference. "So what?" "That just voids the bonus payout. That was the whole point of doing it today, David. We saved the company $4 million. You should be thanking me." "Read the clause, you arrogant fool!" David practically shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "It doesn't void the bonus. It accelerates it. It triggers a punitive multiplier because it legally qualifies as bad faith constructive dismissal. You didn't save this company $4 million today. You just handed her a legally binding uncontestable claim for more than $10 million. Marcus's eyes darted across the highlighted text, his arrogant smirk slowly melting into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror as the reality of the legal jargon set in. Chloe was urgently summoned to the office 2 minutes later by a frantic assistant. When she walked in and saw the metadata of her own digital signature highlighted on David's iPad, her knees physically buckled and she had to grab the back of a chair to keep from hitting the floor. The emergency crisis meeting was convened in the primary boardroom within the hour. The atmosphere in the room was incredibly toxic heavy, with the invisible stench of millions of dollars evaporating into thin air. The chief financial officer, a fiercely pragmatic and entirely humorless man named Arthur, was typing furiously into his complex financial modeling software, his hands visibly shaking over the keyboard. "Let's break down the total firm liability, gentlemen," Arthur said, projecting a grim spreadsheet onto the massive 80-inch screen at the front of the room. Naomi's scheduled equity vest was valued at exactly $4.2 million at today's market open. Clause 11C dictates an automatic 2.5x multiplier for involuntary termination occurring within the 48-hour window prior to vesting. Chloe swallowed hard, her face the color of ash. "So, you're saying we owe her $10.5 million? I'm not finished, Chloe." Arthur snapped viciously, wiping a bead of cold sweat from his forehead. "The clause also guarantees immediate lump sum indemnification of her base salary for 3 subsequent years. Her base is currently $450,000. That's another $1.35 million added to the principal. Furthermore, because her legal team ingeniously embedded a waiver of arbitration exclusively for cases of bad faith dismissal, if we attempt to fight this and lose in open court, which we will, we are liable for all her legal fees and potential punitive damages that could easily exceed 20 million. Marcus slammed his fist petulantly on the table. This is blatant extortion. It's an illegal predatory trap. No judge in this state will uphold a 0.5x multiplier on an executive contract. David Chen stared at his CEO with a mixture of cold disgust and professional pity. It is a mutually agreed upon contractual penalty, Marcus, a contract you signed with your own credentials, a contract Chloe's entire department approved and archived. The metadata log from our own servers shows you had the document open on your screen for exactly 40 seconds before applying your digital signature. You cannot claim ignorance in front of a judge. If this goes to court during the discovery phase, her lawyers will demand access to all internal communications regarding her termination. If they find even one single email or Slack message where you discussed firing her specifically to avoid paying the bonus, which I know for a fact exists, it proves premeditated corporate fraud. We won't just lose the money, Marcus. The SEC will investigate this firm and you will be barred from trading. A suffocating silence descended upon the room. They were completely trapped in an expensive cage of their own making, forged by their own unchecked hubris, and signed with their own hands. At exactly 2:00 p.m., while I was casually browsing real estate listings on my phone, it finally rang. The caller ID didn't show Marcus's direct line, nor did it show Chloe's HR extension. The screen displayed a private, unlisted New York number. I let it ring 3 full times to establish dominance before sliding the answer button, maintaining a tone of breezy, untouchable indifference. Naomi Washington speaking. Naomi, this is Richard Hughes, chairman of the board. His voice was gravelly tired and entirely devoid of the usual fake corporate warmth he used at shareholder galas. He was a ruthless operator, an old-school billionaire who actually controlled Vanguard's purse strings and viewed CEOs as expendable middle managers. Good afternoon, Richard. I trust your day is going well. I assume you received my automated notice. I did, he replied, a remarkably heavy sigh echoing through the receiver. I have just concluded a very long, very unpleasant conference call with David Chen Arthur and our external auditors. I want to be direct with you, Naomi. This clause you embedded, it is an extraordinary piece of legal engineering, highly unorthodox, some might say predatory. I prefer the term proactive risk management. Richard, I said, gazing out the cafe window at the bustling street below, given the highly volatile nature of executive restructuring at Vanguard under current leadership, I felt it fundamentally necessary to ensure my undeniable contributions to the firm's bottom line. I held all the cards. The contract was bulletproof, and we both knew it. Marcus claims he was completely unaware of the multiplier language. Richard stated, testing the waters, probing the perimeter for a weakness or a hint of sympathy. Marcus's reading comprehension skills are not my fiduciary responsibility. I countered smoothly, not giving an inch. The contract was properly submitted, thoroughly reviewed by HR, and fully executed by all required parties 3 years ago. I was escorted out of the building this morning without cause exactly 24 hours before my equity realized. The trigger is absolute and non-negotiable. Richard went quiet for a long, agonizing moment. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. He was doing the brutal math, weighing the catastrophic PR and financial costs of a messy, very public lawsuit against the painful but clean costs of paying me to go away quietly. What is your absolute bottom line number, Naomi, to settle this today without a court filing? The contract explicitly outlines the mathematics, Richard. I don't need to negotiate a settlement when I already have a guarantee. I expect the $11.85 million wired to my offshore accounts by Friday at noon, alongside a neutral, legally vetted letter of reference. If the funds are delayed by even 1 hour, my attorneys will file the breach of contract suit in federal court on Monday morning at 9:00 a.m. sharp. By Thursday morning, the corporate bloodbath at Vanguard Financial was entirely complete, though it happened silently, entirely behind closed doors, on the executive floor. The board of directors convened a special, unscheduled emergency session, and the fallout was incredibly swift and utterly merciless. Marcus was summoned to the boardroom not to lead the meeting or present his quarterly vision, but to face the guillotine. Richard Hughes did not yell. Men with his kind of money rarely need to raise their voices to destroy someone. He simply slid a single piece of crisp white paper across the expansive table to Marcus. It wasn't a standard firing notice. It was a non-negotiable demand for immediate resignation in lieu of termination for gross negligence. You attempted to save this firm $4 million out of sheer spite and unchecked ego. Marcus, Richard stated, his voice laced with venom, and instead you personally cost us nearly $12 million in a single morning. Worse, you exposed this entire board to a massive liability lawsuit and potential SEC scrutiny because you were too arrogant to read the legally binding documents you signed. Marcus tried to argue. He tried to leverage his family's historical connections, his past successes, and his golf buddies on the board, but it was useless. The board had already voted unanimously in a closed session prior to his arrival. He was immediately stripped of his CEO title. His own massive equity packages were frozen pending a deep internal review of his leadership practices, and he was humiliatingly escorted out of the building through the underground freight elevator by private security to avoid media attention in the main lobby. Chloe didn't fare any better. As the HR director who fundamentally failed her primary duty to flag a multi-million-dollar liability before carelessly executing a termination, her professional competence was permanently shattered. She was allowed to resign quietly to save face, but the incredibly tight-knit whisper network in the city's financial district ensured that she would never hold a C-suite position in a major firm ever again. They thought they were cutting dead weight to temporarily boost their quarterly margins and assert dominance. Instead, they performed a horrific corporate amputation on themselves. I wasn't there to witness their downfall, and I didn't need to be. True power isn't about watching your enemies bleed in person. It's about getting the silent push notification from your bank, verifying that their money is now yours. Friday morning, 8:45 a.m. I was sitting comfortably in the ultra-exclusive first-class lounge at JFK International Airport, waiting to board a direct flight to London. I wore a perfectly tailored cream suit, my hair flawlessly styled, nursing a complimentary mimosa, looking every bit the woman who had just conquered her corner of the world without breaking a sweat. My phone chimed with a distinct musical notification from my private high-tier banking app. I unlocked the screen to see a massive pending wire transfer originating from Vanguard Financial Holdings' primary escrow account. The amount was exact to the penny, $11,850,000. The memo line attached to the transfer simply read contractual disbursement. There were no restrictive NDAs preventing me from working in the industry, no messy drawn-out public lawsuits dragging my name through the mud, and no compromises. Just cold, hard liquid capital deposited directly into my control. A few minutes later, an email popped up on my screen from a highly prestigious, notoriously aggressive private equity firm based in Mayfair, London. They had already heard the quiet, terrified whispers of what happened at Vanguard, how a 35-year-old black female executive had legally ruthlessly outmaneuvered an entire board of billionaire directors and walked away with an 8-figure payout overnight. They didn't want to fight me. They recognized a predator, and they wanted to hire me. Naomi, we are very much looking forward to our private dinner on Monday evening. We have prepared an offer for the managing partner position, complete with full autonomy over our European acquisition portfolio and a seat on the executive board. Bring your lawyers to review the paperwork. We deeply respect a woman who knows exactly how to extract her worth. I smiled, locking my phone and slipping it safely into my leather carry-on bag. Marcus and his cronies had deeply believed the age-old corporate lie that the house always wins and the house always protects its own. They forgot that the house is fundamentally built on legally binding contracts, and contracts are just words waiting to be exploited. If you are smart enough, patient enough, and bold enough to quietly rewrite the rules while they aren't looking, you don't just beat the house. You take the deed, sell the property, and walk away smiling. I finished the last sip of my drink, picked up my luggage, and walked steadily toward my gate. It was time to build a new empire.